Okay, so the next question I'm going to go through is this one, which was question 7 on the paper. Evaluate the statement, the hazard risk along the Californian coast are mainly the result of physical processes. And it is worth 16 marks, this question. Those people who didn't do it, this whole paper was out of 66 marks. So if you didn't manage to do well on this question, the maximum number of marks you could have got was 50. Okay, this question is very, very significant. And on both of your papers, there will be a 16-mark question at the end of the fieldwork section. This question is not only sort of the fieldwork-based kind of question, it also requires your synoptasy to come through. So this question is actually asking you to take knowledge from your tectonics unit that you did with your other teacher and apply it here to this question in relation to the coast. So the question is evaluate the statement. Now we need to think about what that evaluation term means. It's the instruction word for this particular question. And evaluate, you've got the sheet of paper, requires a very specific group of skills. The question then is asking us about the hazard risk. So this is our key term, as I said, from tectonics. So we need to be able to know what that word means. Words like multiple hazard zone and those sorts of things should be what in your mind you are thinking about. We then carry on through the question, and it's got this term mainly. Now, to be mainly one thing, we have to be able to evaluate if it can be something else. So what else could it be that is responsible for the hazard risk along the Californian coast other than the physical processes? That's what the word mainly is, meaning. And it's then needing you to put that into a scale. Final part we've got is the physical processes. So we need 2 or 3 points here that tell us about these physical processes that are creating a hazard risk along the Californian coast. Now there's an awful lot in this question, but this question is worth a lot of marks. 16 marks in the exam, together with reading the information, because of course the question starts with study figure 7, you are going to have some 20 minutes to do this question in the exam. 4 or so minutes for studying the figure and planning your answer, and 16 minutes then for writing the answer. Now it's important we think about how this question is going to be marked. We have got marks here for AO1 and marks for AO2. Assessment Objective 1 is all to do with your physical knowledge. So your physical knowledge needs to be strong. AO2 though is about the evaluation skill, where you judge what else it could be and make it into how significant these primary causes are, these physical features are. Now, the mark scheme is very clear. If you have no if you have no AO2 in your answer, the maximum number of marks you can get is 4. 4 out of 16 is 25% of the marks. And from previous years, we know that we're going to need 48-ish% of the marks to score an E. So only having AO1 means we're not going to get the kind of grade that we're looking for. We need at least 8 out of 16 on this question to be scoring into the E grade criteria of it. Now this question is complicated. It has got a lot of parts to it, but as I've just said, we've got 16 minutes to write the answer. We've got another 4 minutes to be reading the sources and planning the answer. Now when we come to looking at the mark scheme, these AO1 assessment objectives are easy, and I think most of you had these. The region is a multi-hazard zone. Whilst we didn't put in the term multi-hazard zone, you had correctly identified, the majority of you, that we had tectonic hazards, geomorphological hazards, hydrometeorological hazards. Nobody, I think, wrote about technological hazards, as I remember reading, but we did have the others present. AO1 then continues through these landslides triggered by many factors such as the earthquakes, which would support the question that these hazards are mainly caused by the physical processes. But landslides can block roads, and high property prices and other infrastructure increasing the vulnerability of these areas is part of the human factors. So actually, the hazard zone is not caused by the physical factors in this case, it is caused by the fact that we have built in this particular area. We also needed to identify maybe this coastal recession. The idea it's not constant, triggered by the heavy rain, which is again part of the physical processes. But it's the flooding that results from that and the damage it causes to our homes that actually is creating us this hazard risk. AO2, and I'm going to show you the whole mark scheme for this question. AO2 is where we're really looking for this in-depth analysis. So the physical beauty of the coastline, for example at Pacifica, is an attraction leading to expensive property investment. Building on the cliff face increases the stress on these cliff faces. Now, no part of building on the cliff faces is physical geography. This is all human geography. On the other hand, the slopes and cliff faces might already have been weakened by the coastal erosion caused by the winter storms. And so actually our building is only a tiny portion of the problem that's been identified here. Second one, we have this idea of coming back to the landslides. The road construction at the top and the base of the cliffs is another human factor. Although again, the cliffs have been weakened over time. They have daily and seasonal long-term variations in the storm events, all of which is going to be affecting them. Some hazard risks are a byproduct of their human vulnerability. However, some hazards are triggered by the earthquakes, particularly along the San Andreas fault line, and it's associated with multiple fault zones. So the focus and the epicenter of the earthquake is merely coincidence with densely populated areas. Is it the dense population that creates as the hazard, or is it the tectonic processes and this event of the earthquake itself? That's what the question is asking you to evaluate. AO2 continues over the page on the mark scheme. I have another 3 points from AO2. So we're looking at the idea that sometimes the disaster can be caused by damage to the expensive infrastructure, but sometimes damage is limited because of the magnitude of the hazard event or because preparation and evacuation routes have been planned. So we're saying here that yes, the hazard is caused by the physical processes, but that the human process can actually mitigate against this disaster. Talks about the monitoring systems and the risk assessment carried out by organisations like the USGS, along this coastline. Some candidates might argue that global climate change and its effect on storm waves makes it easier to predict, means impact the coastal erosion hazard is easier to plan for. Some of you might have actually argued that climate change is in itself contributed to by the human factors and therefore making it not so much of a physical only problem. Overall, although some hazard risks are a result of coastal processes operating along the tectonic plate boundary, the presence of human activity increases vulnerability. Human activity also helps cause human hazards like the landslides. So equally, human hazards may have helped to reduce the risk through engineering design and hazard management strategy. Now, I would suggest when you're answering this question, what we're really and truly looking for is a scale line to be drawn. If I've got my blank sheet of paper here and in my exam I'm trying to do my planning, I need to kind of decide for these evaluate questions about this scale line. So at one side here I've got that the events are purely physical related. They are caused solely by the physical features of these areas. The other end of my spectrum, I would have that as being the human features. Now, ultimately, we need to decide when we're evaluating where along this scale we are. Is it the tectonics? Is it the coastal geomorphology? Is it the fact that people have interacted with these hazard zones? Or is it the fact that we have built and therefore we have created ourselves to be vulnerable? Now, it doesn't matter where you come to in that line, but we are again looking for a very solid, clear structure to this question. So we would be looking for, if we go back to the question, we'd be looking for us to have an introduction where we'd identify some of these key terms and we'd define the physical processes, and we might suggest that mainly they are physical processes, but that we have to consider other things. I would then have my paragraph on my tectonic hazard. I'd probably then have my paragraph on my coastal morphology hazard. Depending on time, I may add another hazard another paragraph specifically about the hydrometeorological. Personally, I would interweave between my paragraphs the amount of it that's human versus the amount of it that's physical. Essential to this question, though, is that we conclude it with a conclusion that is focused solely on this evaluate skill. To what extent do I believe the physical processes are creating this hazard risk along the Californian coastline? Remember to refer to the figure. Remember to make sure that your paragraphs are clear so that the examiner can see 4 or 5 distinct sections of writing.